The blue lights hit your rearview mirror before your brain even catches up. 1 second you're just driving, maybe thinking about dinner or a call you forgot to return, and the next, your chest tightens. You slow down, signal, pull over. Hands on the wheel, heart beating just a little faster than it should. The officer walks up, pauses for a second longer than expected, leans slightly toward your window, and then says it. "I smell marijuana." And just like that, the entire stop changes. Have you ever been in a situation where an officer said something that caught you off guard during a traffic stop, and you weren't sure what you were legally supposed to do next? If you have, drop your experience in the comments, because what most people think they should do in that moment is often exactly what gets them into deeper trouble. And there's something about that "I smell weed" statement that most drivers completely misunderstand. We'll get into that in a bit, because it matters more than you think. Let's slow this down and walk through it the way it actually happens on the road, not the way people imagine it works. When an officer says they smell marijuana, that's not just casual conversation. That statement is often being used as a legal pivot point. It can be the difference between a routine traffic stop and a search of your vehicle. Whether or not anything is actually present doesn't change the immediate pressure of that moment. What matters is how you respond right then, because your response starts building a narrative in the officer's mind. And here's something most drivers don't realize. By the time the officer says that line, they've already been watching you carefully. The way you pulled over, how long it took you, whether you were reaching around inside the car, how steady your hands are, whether your voice sounds calm or shaky. Officers are trained to notice behavior patterns, and once suspicion enters the picture, everything you do gets interpreted through that lens. So let's talk about the first move that can protect you, and it's not dramatic, but it's powerful in a quiet way. Staying calm is not just about being polite, it's about not feeding the narrative. When people hear, "I smell marijuana," their reactions tend to fall into two extremes. Some get defensive immediately. "There's nothing in here, you're wrong." Others start over-explaining, talking too much, trying to convince the officer of their innocence. Both reactions can create problems. Think about it from the officer's perspective for a second. If you get defensive, that can be read as agitation or concealment. If you start talking too much, that can look like nervousness or an attempt to control the situation. Neither helps you. What actually works is controlled, minimal, respectful communication. Something like, "I understand, officer," and then letting the silence sit. That silence feels uncomfortable, but it's also where you avoid giving away unnecessary information. And here's where people make a critical mistake. They think silence looks suspicious. In reality, silence is legally neutral. What turns silence into suspicion is the behavior around it. Fidgeting, avoiding eye contact in a forced way, sudden movements. Calm silence, steady posture, normal breathing, that tells a very different story. Now let's move into something more concrete, because this is where things can escalate quickly. If the officer follows up with, "Do you have anything illegal in the car?" That question is not as simple as it sounds. It's designed to get a verbal admission or create inconsistency later. You might feel tempted to say, "No, nothing at all," even if you're unsure about something minor or something a passenger may have left behind. But here's the issue. If anything is later found, even something small or forgotten, your earlier statement becomes a problem. This is where your second move comes in, and it requires a bit of confidence. You have the right to not answer investigative questions. That doesn't mean being rude or confrontational. It means knowing how to respond in a controlled way. Something like, "I prefer not to answer any questions," delivered calmly, can shift the interaction without escalating it. Now this is where officers sometimes change tone, not always aggressively, but more assertively. You might hear, "If you've got nothing to hide, why not just answer?" That's a psychological nudge. It's designed to make you feel like cooperation equals innocence. But cooperation in the form of conversation is not legally required. Providing your license, registration, and insurance, yes. Answering questions about potential criminal activity? No. And here's something people don't like to hear, but it's true. Being nice doesn't guarantee anything. Officers don't make search decisions based on whether you're friendly. They base them on perceived legal justification. So your goal isn't to win them over. Your goal is to avoid making things worse. Now let's talk about the third move, because this is where the situation often crosses a line that many drivers don't recognize in real time. Consent. If an officer asks, "Do you mind if I take a look inside your vehicle?" That question sounds casual, almost friendly. But legally, it's one of the most important moments in the entire stop. If you say yes, you've just given them permission to search, and that changes everything. It removes the need for them to justify the search later in many cases. What's tricky is how this question is often delivered. It's rarely framed as a high-stakes legal decision. It feels like a simple request. Some drivers even think refusing will make them look guilty. But here's the reality. Refusing consent is not an admission of guilt. It's an assertion of your rights. A calm response like, "I do not consent to any searches," is clear, respectful, and legally significant. And yes, it might create a moment of tension. The officer might pause. They might look at you differently. But that's not the same as you doing something wrong. Now, this doesn't mean the officer won't search anyway. If they believe they have probable cause, they may proceed. But your refusal matters later. It preserves your position legally. And this brings us back to that statement we mentioned earlier. "I smell marijuana." Because depending on the state, that statement alone may or may not justify a search. Laws have been changing, especially in states where marijuana has been legalized or decriminalized. Some courts have ruled that the smell alone is no longer enough. Others still treat it as probable cause. That's why this situation is so complicated. Drivers often assume the officer's statement automatically gives them unlimited authority. That's not always true, but it's also not something you should argue about on the roadside, which leads directly into the fourth move. Don't argue law on the side of the road. This is one of the hardest things for people to accept. You might know your state laws, you might even be right, but the roadside is not the place where legal debates get resolved. If you start saying things like, "That's not probable cause anymore," or "You can't search my car based on smell," you're stepping into a confrontation that rarely ends in your favor in that moment. Officers are not required to agree with your interpretation of the law on the spot, and challenging them directly can shift the tone of the interaction in ways you don't want. Instead, your focus should stay on documenting your behavior through calm, consistent actions. If your rights are violated, that becomes an issue for later, through legal channels, not roadside arguments. Now here's something that people don't talk about enough, and it's where many situations quietly spiral. Passengers. If you're not alone in the vehicle, everything becomes more unpredictable. Officers may direct questions to passengers. They may observe interactions between you. They may even separate people during questioning. And here's the problem. You can control your behavior, but you can't fully control someone else's. A nervous passenger who starts talking too much, contradicting your statements, or making sudden movements can change the entire tone of the stop. Even something as simple as a passenger blurting out, "There's nothing in here," can raise suspicion if it feels forced or out of sync. This is why experienced drivers keep things simple and avoid unnecessary conversation within the vehicle once the stop begins. Every word spoken is being heard, even if it's not addressed directly to the officer. Now let's talk about the fifth move, and this one is subtle but incredibly important. Pay attention to time. A traffic stop is supposed to be temporary and related to its initial purpose, like speeding or a broken tail light. But when an officer introduces something like the smell of marijuana, the scope can expand. Still, that doesn't mean the stop can go on indefinitely without justification. If your documents are taken and held for an extended period while unrelated questioning continues, that's something to be aware of. If you're asked to wait while additional units arrive or a canine is called, the timing matters. But again, this is where people make mistakes. They either say nothing and let things drag on indefinitely, or they suddenly become confrontational. There's a middle ground. A calm question like, "Am I being detained or am I free to go?" can clarify the situation without escalating it. The way that question is answered, and the timing of it, can tell you a lot about what's happening. And here's something that often gets overlooked. Tone matters just as much as words. The exact same sentence can either de-escalate or inflame the situation, depending on how it's delivered. If your voice sounds irritated, sarcastic, or challenging, the officer may respond differently. If it's calm and steady, it keeps the interaction grounded. Now let's circle back to something we hinted at earlier, because it's one of the biggest misconceptions people carry into these situations. The idea that if you have nothing to hide, you have nothing to worry about. That sounds logical on the surface, but real-world traffic stops don't always operate on that logic. People get searched and questioned even when they've done nothing wrong. Mistakes happen, misinterpretations happen, and once a situation escalates, it can be difficult to reverse in the moment. Protecting your rights is not about hiding something. It's about understanding that the system isn't perfect, and your behavior plays a role in how events unfold. You don't control the officer's decisions. You don't control what they think they smell. You don't control how they interpret your actions. But you do control how you respond. And that response, calm, measured, aware, can make the difference between a routine stop that ends quickly and a situation that drags into something much more complicated. Because once you're standing on the side of the road, with cars passing by and lights flashing behind you, the theory disappears. What's left is the moment, the pressure, the uncertainty. And in that moment, it's not about being perfect, it's about not making it worse.